So, Kate, what have we got in today's show?
We've got spooks galore in today's show.
I think we've got some cloak and dagger as well, plenty of intrigue. It's going to get quite murky and dark and rather tantalising, isn't it? Hello, and welcome to another episode of Queens, Kings and Dastardly Things. I'm Robert Hardman, Royal Historian, biographer and Daily Mail columnist. I'm joined as ever by my co-host, Professor Kate Williams, fellow historian and biographer. Hello, Kate.
Hello, Robert.
And this week we are looking at Spies and the Crown. We're going to be delving into the world of royalty, spooks and subterfuge. It's a fascinating area, isn't it, Kate? This murky sort of demi-monde of where royals meet the spooks, where royals meet the people who we never know about, but they do. I mean, it is fascinating that one of the duties of the monarch, in fact, the monarch and the royal family generally, is to give the security services a pat on the back. It's something that's very important because obviously if you're working for MI5 or MI6, MI5 obviously being domestic intelligence, MI6 on the international security front, you can never blow your trumpet. You're never known. What you do has to remain.
Always a civil servant.
Yes, you just work for the government.
You're the government.
And in an unspecified office. But like anybody, you need your incentives. You need your morale boosts. You need to be told you're doing a good job, and that's something that the royals do. It's worth remembering in 2019, Prince William spent several weeks with the security services, MI5, National Intelligence, MI6, International Intelligence. And it wasn't just, your usual sort of royal away day to see what was going on. He actually spent several weeks immersed in what they do, because when you're the monarch, you need to know this stuff. Nothing is shielded from you.
And it's interesting, isn't it? And we'll talk about this in our episodes, but as the monarch, you are often the top aim of the enemy security services. They want to bump off the monarch. And there are these conversations about whether or not royals can go to war or not because they'll be a kidnap target. And certainly we're going to talk about this in the Tudors. So the number one aim of many enemy security services is to get the Queen or get the King into their power. So in a sense, they're obviously learning about state threats, but also they're learning about threats possibly to their own life.
But it's interesting that I think one of their key roles, and it's a role that we're never privy to, but it is in really promoting and championing the work of the security services. When I was writing my biography of the late Queen, I interviewed the former Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, and he was very interesting. He said the thing that most impressed him about Prince Charles in his princely days was when he would do these covert investitures for the security services, and these would never pop up in the court circular. Nothing was known about them. But
many civil servants just got an award.
Yeah,
just
exactly.
Randomly.
But were never seen.
Splendid work at the filing.
Yeah, exactly. These were public servants who we will never know about. But a grateful nation nonetheless wanted to bestow on them, the MBEs and ABEs and even the odd knighthood. These would be done entirely in private. You could bring your family along, and there'd be this rather nice sort of ceremony at Clarence House. And everybody knew what everyone else had done. Everything was discussed in sort of coded terms. So just say, oh, you did very well on Operation Dandelion.
Yes.
Oh, wasn't Operation such and such a success? But everyone knew what they were talking about.
I mean, I'm ruining my chance of ever being recruited to MI6 now, but I'm very disappointed because no one ever tried to recruit me at university for the spy service at all. And the people I know who did occasionally get a tap on the shoulder were very good looking, so I have to take it as a vision that I wasn't good looking enough. And you're not a spy. You could be. I mean, I think it could be a good cover for you to be a spy.
No,
you travel all over the place at short notice. You're always writing things. It could be a cover.
Yeah, that's right. I my lips are sealed. No, I like you. I was always slightly disappointed when I was at university. I never got any sort of a whisper in the air, would you like to come and have a drink with someone from the government who'd like to have a word? None of that.
No one.
And actually, in my particular college at my university, I had rooms next to someone who I later discovered was the number one recruiter for MI6. He was a professor.
He was a professor.
He was a professor of Middle Eastern languages, and he was a very nice chap, actually.
So you talked to him, you were friendly with him,
I used to bump into him on the staircase.
Say, Robert.
He never said, by the way, do you want to pop in for a sherry and discuss your career prospects? It might have had something to do with the fact that I was writing the gossip column on the university newspaper at the time. So maybe
surely that would be a great double bluff.
Could have been. Anyway, never happened.
They used to say that there was a cocktail party and and it was lots of alcohol for students, and the few people left standing would be the ones who were approached. But I wasn't invited to the cocktail party, so I don't know.
I suppose if you were going to get into a sort of vodka contest with the KGB, it would help if you had, strong.
You could hold your alcohol. Maybe that was my problem.
Let's just go back and look at royalty and spies, where it all began. Did the royal family invent spying?
We've had spies in courts right from the beginning of time. And Alfred the Great would have had spies. But these spies, what they tend to do, most ambassadors are seen as spies. Most ambassadors are seen as working for the enemy, particularly those in the Renaissance period working for the Holy Roman Emperor. So, of course, Henry VIII expects every one of his foreign ambassadors to be a spy. But really, what those ambassadors are doing is reporting, eavesdropping. Their role is to provide information, and that's really what they're doing. So most people accept that, and that's the way that modern diplomacy goes. They're shaking hands with someone they know is going to report badly on them. And what we see is a complete change of this under Elizabeth I. Elizabeth comes to the throne in 1558 after the death of her sister Mary I, who's tried to create Britain into a Catholic country. During Mary's reign, a lot of Protestants have fled to Europe, and there they create networks. And when Elizabeth comes in, they come back and they serve her. And many of these Protestants are totally convinced they are living in a time of crisis, that the Catholics are going to rise up and kill them, and this is what they have to stop. And Francis Walsingham is responsible for this incredible development of the Secret Service in Elizabeth's reign. And it's more than ambassadors listening and writing reports. What we see now is what we imagine spies to be doing when we read spy novels and watch spy movies. It is code, it is secret letters, and it is infiltration. And so you have...
And presumably a network.
A network. So actually Walsingham pays them himself. So Walsingham has about 40 men in his service. It's not a state service. These are often Walsingham's personally paid servants. And what they're doing is looking at the activities of Catholics in Europe and in England itself. And they're obsessed, particularly their number one enemy, who they fear most of all, is poor old Mary Queen of Scots. Walsingham is totally convinced that the Catholics in Europe and in Britain want her on the throne, and they will kill Elizabeth and get Mary on the throne, and she will restore the country Catholicism. Now, this is because if Elizabeth doesn't have a child, the next in line in terms of blood is Mary Queen of Scots, because they are cousins, because Mary Queen of Scots' grandma was Henry VIII's sister. So that's why she's so close. And that's why they fear her. She's public enemy number one for them.
So the Secret Services hatch a plan to do Mary in, right?
Well, yes. Essentially, what they do is they get this secret agent who goes to Mary saying, I can get your letters from France. And he's a double agent, and Mary thinks he's going to open this way for her. And they have this secret way. They tell her, Mary, it's totally secret. You can get your letters out of your imprisonment via a beer keg. Put them in the beer keg, and no one will know. And she thinks this guy Gifford, who's the secret agent, is marvellous. So Mary starts sending these letters back and forth. But there's a problem. All these letters are just usual stuff. Oh, how is everyone? How are my estates? Nothing particularly fascinating. And then there's a Catholic nobleman called Anthony Babington, a very young, idealistic man. And he gets very friendly with this priest called John Ballard. And John Ballard's best friend is Walsingham's man. So Ballard and Babington create this plot with, I would say, the instigation of Ballard's man, he's reporting back the whole time to Walsingham. So Babington sends Mary this letter saying, I know, got a great idea. Let's bump off Elizabeth, put you on the throne, and Spain will invade and we'll all rise up. And Mary gets this letter. And then she writes back, but she doesn't endorse the plot. It's all a bit ambiguous, and she doesn't write it herself. Her secretaries write it in code, and this letter comes back in the beer keg. It comes straight back to Walsingham, and he's got this letter, but he's not really sure it says enough, because she doesn't say, oh no, don't do that to Elizabeth, but it doesn't say, oh yes, fine, go for it, chaps. So what they do is when they get this letter, they forge a postscript on it in which Mary is said to be saying, who exactly is going part of this? And could you tell me exactly what they're going to do?
So it's Walsingham's spooks have finally got the evidence that will take Mary Queen of Scots to the block.
This is what they've been waiting for. You're absolutely right, Robert. And she is tried. And at her trial, she says, Walsingham, you have cursed me and you did it. But this evidence is irrefutable. And then, of course, she is sent to the execution. Elizabeth doesn't want to execute her. She thinks it's going to be a disaster. But there's no way that Walsingham and his chums and all the other men in the Privy Council are going to let Mary Queen of Scots live after this. So executed she must be. And they do it behind Elizabeth's back.
Brilliant. And just tell us about a few of these other famous Tudor spies, the sort of James Bonds of the sort of doublet era.
Yes.
Because Christopher Marlowe, the playwright, he was one, wasn't he?
Was Christopher Marlowe a spy? I think it's very possible, and certainly that was exactly the type of young man that was recruited. Clever, idealistic, travelled around, and they were recruited not just because they were bright, but because they were very good at blending into the backgrounds and infiltrating, the kind of person that no one suspected.
And Kate, around this time, don't we actually come across the very first 007? Is that right?
We have John Dee, who was the Queen's astrologer, who was the advisor to the Queen, who was a very significant figure. He was a scholar. He had all these strange visions that he made his poor wife submit to. And his signature was a 00 and a hook. So do we have
a hook like a 7?
A hook like a 7. Do we have our original 007? But certainly, if you were looking for someone to make you some magic codes, he was your man.
Maybe Ian Fleming came across the files on John Dee, and that gave him the idea for 007. Who knows? So, Kate, we've reflected on the fact it's the royals who got spying off the ground, notably the Tudors. But let's talk about people actually spying on the royals themselves, using their proximity to the throne.
Well, every time a person who's not of the establishment gets close to a royal member, people start suspecting that they're a spy. They immediately start casting any mistress as a spy, any advisor who's a spy. Of course, James I is very fond of various advisors, and people start saying they're spies. And what we do see in the reign of Victoria is when she's very good friends with John Brown, a devoted friendship. We've talked about that. And then there's also Abdul Karim, a young Indian servant who comes over for the Jubilee, and she becomes very fond of them. They create this friendship. And Abdul Karim, I think, is a very harmless person, but they suspect him. They start suspecting that he's an informer, he's influencing the Queen. And I think everything about this whole story is racist about Abdul Karim. It's sexist that the Queen is too easily influenced, and she has a little power at the time, but people are fearful that Victoria is going to be too sympathetic to India because she's been influenced by Abdul Karim. Essentially, the men around Victoria don't want her to be influenced by anyone but themselves.
Let's just talk a little about Abdul Karim, because I mean he has been the subject of books and films, and it is a rather extraordinary tale. But just rewind, he is the Indian manservant who comes over to the court in 1887, as you say, for around the time of her Golden Jubilee. He starts by serving on her at the table, and very soon she's rather charmed by his good looks. He's very kindly to her, and she starts to ask him to teach her some basic Urdu, and to essentially give her an insight into this vast part of her empire about which she knows very little. And this friendship forms. And fairly soon he's starting to advise her over time on policy towards India, how the British colonial administration should be operating. So you could see why within the establishment they think, look, who's this guy? One minute he's sort of serving her at the table, and now he's turned into this sort of de facto sort of diplomat who's actually shaping foreign policy. I mean, he's sort of saying to her, look, Britain needs to be kinder to people in India. It needs to, and particularly, I think there's a sort of suspicion that he is making her more sympathetic towards the Muslim population in India rather than the Hindu population. So there are these court jealousies.
We don't want this Indian servant near Victoria. That's what they're thinking. And you're absolutely right, Robert, when you say she's fascinated by the country, but she knows so little about it. And she knows that the reports she gets are doctored, are filtered, are given to her to really keep her in line with a certain policy. So she wants to know the truth. And it's very interesting how Victoria actually is often writing to various other advisors or wives or people she knows, asking them for what's really going on. And of course, Victoria has very little power at this point, but still, no one wants the Empress of India thinking off script, really. They want to keep her on script.
I don't think anyone ever thought that he was going to be sort of revealing secrets to foreigners.
But they fear that Karim, rather than just being an objective advisor, which I think he was, I think he was an objective advisor, I think he was trying to talk to the Queen, I think he was an intelligent man, and I think he genuinely was also devoted to the Queen and devoted to her service. He wasn't someone out for himself, but yet that's how he's seen. He's very suspected.
Well, I think it's fascinating that some of his diaries only came to light in, I think it was about 10 or 15 years ago. They were found in a chest in what's now Pakistan, because being a Muslim, his family, when they left, went back to India and then moved to Pakistan after partition. But what's really interesting is that it was clearly a very close friendship. I mean, there are letters and diary entries talking of signed with sort of XXX kisses, that sort of thing, which is certainly shows a degree of intimacy that was clearly there. But as you say, I don't think there's very little to show that he was any sort of spy. I think he was very keen to shore up as much power and wealth, frankly, for his family, because he knew that when Victoria died, that was it. He'd be on his way out. And as soon as she died, that's what happened.
Yeah, he didn't get much. He was out.
Edward VII kicked him out. But by that point, he'd acquired considerable wealth. He acquired land back in India. I don't think we can say he was a spy, but we can certainly say he was an extraordinary kind of presence in the sort of late Victorian era. And it just shows that actually when you're a monarch and you're surrounded by sort of scheming courtiers, it can be quite nice to have someone who's completely from somewhere totally different.
And totally honest with you.
Yeah,
yes.
who's going to tell you things that the establishment won't.
We've looked at the Tudors, we've looked at the Victorians, and although our monarchs are surrounded by plots, we haven't found any evidence that any of these have been spies themselves. But that gets rather different when we're talking about, Edward VIII.
Yeah, you're right, Kate. The one who I think went closest to betraying his country was Edward VIII. He's clearly certainly sympathetic towards the rise of Hitler, the rise of National Socialism in Germany. By the time he comes to his brief reign in 1936, there's his mistress, Wallis Simpson, who's very, very friendly with the Nazi ambassador to London, Ribbentrop. And there's plenty of evidence that not that she was in the pay of the German government, but that she was certainly very friendly. I mean, there are rumours that she had an affair with Ribbentrop. They've been dismissed by a number of historians. But I think it's safe to say that the Wallis Simpson-Ribbentrop friendship gave Hitler and Germany a sense of proximity to the kings. And then, obviously, when Edward VIII abdicates, that's a setback for the Germans. Suddenly their pro-German monarch is no more. But as soon as we get to the Second World War, suddenly Germany realises that actually the Duke of Windsor, the former king, could be very useful. He could be used as possibly some sort of wedge. He could be brought in as a sort of puppet monarch if Germany can inflict enough damage on Britain, so that George VI is either bumped off or abdicates or is somehow moved out of the way. well, let's put Edward VIII in there because he's one of us. And so you get this extraordinary plan in 1940. France has fallen. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor have sort of fled into Spain. And the Germans are very keen to, there are spies galore at this point. I mean, everybody's got their spies.
Everyone's a spy.
Everyone's a spy. And those spies are all congregating around the Windsors because British spies want to know what's he saying. And German spies equally want to know, how can we maybe use him as a sort of puppet.
And, of course, they'd made this infamous trip to Germany, seen National Socialism in action, and Hitler and the Duke of Windsor had actually met.
Yeah, it was a famous meeting at his country retreat at Berchtesgaden in 1937. And Hitler felt, here's someone I could do business with. So war breaks out. And there is a very strong German push to somehow persuade the Duke of Windsor, if he can be possibly stopped from going back to Britain, if he can be used to somehow influence British opinion towards some sort of truce with Germany, well, let's give it a go. So first of all, he has to flee France. When France falls, he goes to Spain. All the spies are coalescing around him and Wallace in Madrid.
So many friends.
And they move on to Lisbon. This German officer, Schellenberg, is dispatched to Lisbon to try and get the Windsors out of Portugal back into Spain. It's easier to manipulate them in Spain because Spain is effectively a fascist ally, although it's technically neutral. And they know that the Brits are trying to get the Windsors out of Portugal. They want to get them somewhere else, which is why, in the end, Churchill and the King hatched this plan to make the Duke the governor of the Bahamas. It's just a way of getting him out.
Getting him out
Don't
as
want him
far
in
as
Europe.
possible.
And so that this agent, Schellenberg, he's doing all sorts of things. He's sort of sending messages, coded messages to the Duke of Windsor saying the British Secret Service are out to get you. He gets messages to them saying that there's if they leave Portugal on a ship, the Brits are going to blow it up because they want to kill you. He even recruits a gang of yobs to chuck stones at the bedroom window of the residence where the Windsors are staying, saying that actually this is a pro-British mob. They're coming to get you. He's doing his best to put the frighteners on Windsor, as I say, to draw him into a sort of German sphere of influence. And the Brits get wind of this as well. They think we've got to get this ludicrous ex-monarch out and his dreadful wife before they do some serious damage. So they send his chum, Walter Monckton, he used to be his private secretary, they send him out to Lisbon to say, look, come on, get a grip. You're being sent off to govern the Bahamas. The Germans don't manage to grab their puppet king.
Harder when he's in the Bahamas. But that's the Duke of Windsor surrounded by spies. But it wasn't the only spying operation connected to the royal family. Even more recently, there was a spy on the royal payroll.
Oh, yes, there was.
Oh, yes, there was.
Very embarrassing it was too.
One of the most fascinating figures in history to me. And we are going to talk about him next week. Anthony Blunt, thanks for listening to this week's episode of Queens, Kings and Dastardly Things with me, Kate Williams, and Robert Hardman. Join us next week for more Spies and the Crown.
Goodbye.